The morning sun cast long shadows across the private gardens of Adelaide Cottage as Catherine Sled, Princess of Wales, stood at the kitchen window, watching her husband pack his belongings into the black Range Rover. The scene looked ordinary enough from the outside, but inside the cozy cottage, an emotional storm was brewing that would change everything between them. William moved with mechanical precision, folding his clothes into the leather travel bag their children had given him for Father's Day. His movements were careful, measured, as if he was trying to maintain control over something that was rapidly slipping away. Catherine noticed how he avoided looking directly at her, instead focusing on mundane tasks that suddenly seemed incredibly important. The decision hadn't come easily. For months, they had discussed the upcoming tour of Australia and New Zealand. But recent events had made everything more complicated. Catherine's health concerns, which had been kept private from the public, had reached a point where difficult choices needed to be made. The royal duties that once seemed manageable now felt overwhelming, especially with 3 young children who needed their mother more than ever. "You don't have to do this alone," Catherine had whispered to him the night before, as they lay awake in their bed, both pretending to sleep. But they both knew the truth. The crown waited for no one, and William's responsibilities as heir to the throne couldn't be postponed indefinitely. The tour had been planned for over a year, with dozens of engagements, charity visits, and state functions that couldn't be cancelled without causing diplomatic concerns. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been unusually quiet during breakfast, sensing the tension that their parents tried so hard to hide. Children always know when something important is happening, even when adults think they're being subtle. Charlotte had climbed onto William's lap while he drank his coffee, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a way that made Catherine's heart ache. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" she had asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. William had smiled, but Catherine saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down their daughter's hair. The royal staff had been briefed about the situation, but they maintained their professional distance, understanding that this was a private family moment that required space and respect. Even so, Catherine could feel their concerned glances, their unspoken questions about what this separation might mean for the future of the monarchy. As William carried his bag to the car, Catherine followed him outside, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of traffic from the main road. It was one of those perfectly ordinary mornings that would be remembered forever, the kind of moment that becomes a turning point in a story. "The children will miss you," Catherine said, though they both knew she was really talking about herself. William stopped walking and turned to face her, his blue eyes reflecting a mixture of duty and heartbreak that had become all too familiar in recent months. "I know," he replied simply, and in those 2 words, Catherine heard everything he couldn't say. The weight of expectations, the burden of tradition, the impossible balance between being a husband and father and being the future King of England. She had known this life would be difficult when she married him, but knowing something intellectually and living it emotionally were entirely different experiences. They stood there in silence for a moment, 2 people who had shared so much together, now facing a separation that felt different from all the others. This wasn't just another royal engagement or overseas tour. This was a test of their marriage, their commitment, their ability to navigate the complex demands of royal life while protecting their family. "Catherine," he reached out and straightened William's tie, a simple gesture that had become their private ritual over the years. Her fingers lingered on the silk fabric, and William covered her hand with his own, their wedding rings catching the morning light. These small moments of connection had sustained them through countless challenges, but today, even their familiar comfort felt fragile. "Promise me you'll call every night," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you'll remember that we're here, waiting for you to come home." William nodded, unable to trust his voice. "I had made countless promises over the years, but this one felt different. This one felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to when the demands of royal duty threatened to pull him away from everything that truly mattered." The security detail waited respectfully by the car, their presence a constant reminder of the life they had chosen, the responsibilities that came with their titles and positions. But in this moment, Catherine and William were simply a husband and wife. Facing an uncertain future together, as William opened the car door, Catherine felt the weight of all the things they hadn't said, all the fears they hadn't shared, all the hopes they were afraid to voice. The morning was growing brighter, but somehow the space between them felt darker, filled with the shadow of an approaching goodbye that neither of them was ready to face. "I love you," William said, and Catherine knew that these words would have to carry them both through whatever came next. The car engine started, and the sound seemed to echo through the quiet morning, marking the beginning of a journey that would change everything they thought they knew about love, duty, and the price of wearing the crown. The car pulled away from Adelaide Cottage, and Catherine stood frozen in the driveway, watching the taillights disappear around the bend. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of birds singing in the oak trees that bordered their property. She remained there longer than necessary, as if moving would make William's departure real in a way she wasn't ready to accept. Inside the house, the children were getting ready for school, their voices echoing through the hallways with the kind of innocent chatter that usually brought Catherine comfort. Today, however, their normalcy felt almost surreal against the backdrop of her emotional turmoil. She forced herself to walk back inside, knowing that George, Charlotte, and Louis would need her to be strong to maintain the routine that gave their young lives stability. "Mummy, where did Daddy go?" Louis asked, looking up from his cereal bowl with wide, curious eyes. At 5 years old, he was old enough to notice changes, but too young to understand their complexity. Catherine knelt down beside his chair, smoothing his unruly hair with gentle fingers. "Daddy has to go to work, sweetheart. He's going to visit some very important people in Australia," she explained, using the same calm tone she had perfected over years of royal engagements. But inside, her heart was breaking at the simplicity of the question and the complexity of the real answer. George, now 11 and increasingly aware of his family's unique circumstances, looked at his mother with understanding beyond his years. "How long will he be gone?" he asked quietly, and Catherine recognized William's serious expression reflected in their eldest son's face. 3 weeks, she replied, though the time frame felt both impossibly long and dangerously short. To handle royal duties while William was away. 3 weeks to prove she could manage the children, the household, and her own responsibilities without falling apart. 3 weeks to figure out what their marriage would look like, when duty and family continued to pull them in different directions. After the children left for school, Catherine found herself alone in the house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. She wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects that seemed to hold memories of happier times. The photograph on the mantelpiece from their wedding day, the children's artwork stuck to the refrigerator, the book William had been reading, that still lay open on his bedside table. Her phone buzzed with a text message from William. "Landed safely. Missing you already." The words should have provided comfort, but instead they emphasized the distance between them, the thousands of miles that would separate them for the next 3 weeks. Catherine typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple heart emoji. Unable to find words that adequately expressed her complicated feelings, the royal household staff moved through their duties with professional efficiency. But Catherine could sense their concern. They had worked with the family long enough to recognize when something was different, when the usual dynamics had shifted in ways that might affect their carefully orchestrated routines. Mrs. Henderson, their longtime housekeeper, approached. Catherine, with unusual hesitation, "Your Royal Highness, shall I prepare the guest room for any additional security arrangements while the prince is away?" She asked her question, carefully neutral but loaded with unspoken implications. Catherine understood that the staff were trying to gauge how significant this separation might be, whether it represented a temporary adjustment or something more permanent. "No, that won't be necessary," Catherine replied, perhaps too quickly. "Everything will remain as usual." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered if anything would ever be usual again. The patterns of their life had been disrupted in ways that went beyond a simple business trip or royal engagement. Throughout the day, Catherine threw herself into her own royal duties with an intensity that surprised even her. She reviewed briefings for upcoming engagements, responded to correspondence, and participated in video conferences with charity representatives. The work provided a welcome distraction from the emotional weight of William's absence, but it also served as a reminder of how much their lives revolved around service to others. During lunch, she sat alone at the kitchen table where just hours earlier the whole family had been gathered. The silence was broken by the sound of her phone ringing. William's name appeared on the screen, and Catherine felt her heart rate increase as she answered. "How are you doing?" William's voice sounded distant, filtered through thousands of miles and the artificial clarity of international phone lines. Catherine could hear unfamiliar sounds in the background, the bustle of a different world that he was now navigating without her. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then caught herself. "No, actually, I'm not fine. I miss you terribly, and it's only been a few hours." The admission felt both liberating and vulnerable. A crack in the composed facade she had maintained throughout the day. William was quiet for a moment, and Catherine could picture him in some hotel room or official residence, probably surrounded by staff and schedules and the constant demands of royal protocol. "I miss you too," he said finally. "This feels different, Catherine. Harder somehow." They talked for 20 minutes, sharing details about their respective days. But the conversation felt stilted, interrupted by the awareness that others might be listening, that their privacy was always conditional. When they finally hung up, Catherine felt more alone than she had before the call. That evening, she tucked the children into bed. Charlotte asked the question that Catherine had been dreading. "Mummy, are you sad because Daddy is gone?" The little girl's intuition was sharp, her ability to sense emotional undercurrents uncanny. Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have to do difficult things even when they don't want to. Daddy is doing important work, and even though we miss him, we're proud of him." "But you're still sad," Charlotte persisted, and Catherine realized that honesty might be more valuable than protection in this moment. "Yes, sweetheart, I am sad, but that's okay. Sometimes it's normal to feel sad when someone we love goes away, even when we know they're doing good things." Catherine kissed her daughter's forehead, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair, and wondering how many more bedtime conversations they would have before William returned. Later that night, lay in their bed, staring at the empty space beside her. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and sighs. But without William's presence, even the most comfortable spaces felt foreign. She reached for her phone and scrolled through photos of their life together, looking for reassurance that this separation was temporary. They would find their way back to each other across the distance and the demands of their extraordinary life. 1 week into William's absence, Catherine found herself establishing new rhythms that both sustained and challenged her. The initial shock of his departure had given way to a strange sort of independence that she hadn't experienced since their early dating years. She woke up earlier, spent longer with the children at breakfast, and discovered that she could handle the morning school rush with surprising efficiency. When she didn't have to coordinate with William's schedule, the children, too, had adapted in their own ways. George had become more protective of his younger siblings, stepping into a role that reminded Catherine painfully of William at that age. Charlotte had grown more clingy, peering at Catherine's bedside in the middle of the night with bad dreams and questions about when Daddy would return. Louis, perhaps the most resilient of the three, had started drawing elaborate pictures of airplanes and maps. His 5-year-old mind trying to comprehend the distance between England and Australia. "Look, Mummy," Louis said one afternoon, spreading his latest creation across the kitchen table. "I drew Daddy's plane going over the ocean. See, it's really far, but it's not too far for love to reach." The innocent wisdom of his words hit Catherine unexpectedly, and she had to turn away to compose herself before praising his artwork. The royal engagements continued, but Catherine found herself approaching them with a different perspective. Without William beside her, she had to carry conversations, make decisions, and represent the monarchy entirely on her own. The experience was both empowering and exhausting. At a charity gala for children's mental health, she spoke with a passion that surprised even her, drawing from her own recent emotional experiences to connect with the cause in a more personal way. "Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we're struggling," she told the assembled crowd, her words carrying more weight than the prepared speech she had set aside. Supporting each other through difficult times isn't just about professional help. It's about being honest with the people we love, about allowing ourselves to feel vulnerable. The audience responded with unusual warmth, and Catherine realized that her personal struggles had somehow made her more relatable, more human to the people she served. Later, reviewing coverage of the event, she noticed how the photographers had captured something different in her expression, a depth that hadn't been there before. Meanwhile, William's daily phone calls had become both a lifeline and a source. A frustration, time difference, meant that their conversations often happened at awkward moments. When one of them was rushing to an engagement or dealing with children's bedtime routines, the distance created a strange intimacy, forcing them to communicate more directly than they had in months. But it also highlighted how much of their relationship had been built on physical presence and shared experiences. "Online," William told her during one of their evening calls. "You were incredible, Catherine. Really incredible. I don't think I've ever heard you speak with such honesty." We sitting in their bedroom wearing one of William's old sweaters that still smelled faintly of his cologne. "It felt different," she admitted, "like I was speaking from a place I hadn't accessed before. Maybe because I had to dig deeper to find the strength to do it without you there." "I'm proud of you," William said, and Catherine heard something in his voice that she couldn't quite identify. Pride, yes, but also something else. Perhaps surprise, or even a hint of concern about what her independence might mean for their dynamic when he returned. The conversation was interrupted by Charlotte's voice calling from down the hall. "Mummy, I can't find my teddy bear." Catherine sighed, the familiar tug between royal duty and motherhood asserting itself once again. "I should go," she told William. "Charlotte needs me, and Louis is probably awake to bye now." "Of course," William replied, but Catherine detected a note of disappointment in his voice. "I love you, Catherine. I'll call tomorrow." After handling the children's nighttime crisis and settling them back into bed, Catherine found herself in the kitchen, making tea and thinking about the strange evolution of their relationship over the past week. But this separation was revealing strengths she hadn't known she possessed. At the same time, she was discovering aspects of their marriage that she had taken for granted. The ways William's presence had shaped her sense of self and her approach to their shared responsibilities. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Pippa saw the speech coverage. "You're glowing, Kate. Really glowing. How are you managing?" Catherine stared at the message, realizing that she didn't have a simple answer. She was managing, but the process was changing her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next morning brought news that would complicate everything further. William's private secretary called to inform Catherine that the tour was being extended by 4 days due to unexpected diplomatic opportunities. The additional time would allow for important meetings with Pacific Island leaders and could significantly strengthen Commonwealth relationships. "I understand the importance," Catherine told the secretary, her voice carefully controlled. "Please let the prince know that we support the extension." But after hanging up, she sat at her desk for a long moment, feeling the weight of this new development. For additional days meant the children would miss more time with their father, meant her own responsibilities would continue to expand, meant the test of their separation would be longer and more challenging than they had originally planned. When she told the children about the extension during lunch, their reactions varied predictably. George nodded with mature understanding, Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. And Louis simply asked, "Is Daddy going to live in Australia now?" "No, sweetheart," Catherine assured him, pulling him onto her lap. "Daddy will always come home to us. Sometimes his work just takes a little longer than we expect." But as she spoke the words, she wondered if she was reassuring Louis or herself. That afternoon, while the children were at their writing lessons, Catherine took a walk through the gardens of Adelaide Cottage. The autumn colors were at their peak, the trees displaying the kind of natural beauty that had initially drawn her and William to this property. She found herself at the bench where they often sat together in the evenings, watching the children play and planning their family's future. Sitting alone on the bench, Catherine felt the full weight of the past week settling around her. She had proven to herself that she could handle the children, the household, and her royal duties independently. But the success of her solo week had raised questions she hadn't expected to face. Had she been limiting herself by always deferring to William's lead? Had their partnership, as strong as it was, prevented her from discovering her own full potential? The questions felt disloyal, even thinking them, but they persisted as she sat in the gathering dusk. When her phone rang with William's evening call, she answered, with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty, wondering if he could sense the changes in her through the digital connection that now defined their relationship. The extended separation had reached its second week. William found himself in a hotel room in Sydney, staring at his phone and trying to calculate the best time to call home. The tour had been successful by every measure that mattered too. The Foreign Office and the Palace, but personally, it felt like he was losing something important with each passing day. The time difference had become his enemy, creating a barrier between him and his family that went beyond mere geography. His days were filled with the familiar routine of royal engagements, ribbon cuttings, charity visits, state dinners, and endless handshakes with officials whose names he would forget within hours. The work was important, he knew that, but without Catherine beside him, it felt hollow somehow. He had always been the one expected to carry the heavier burden of royal responsibility, but her absence made him realize how much he had relied on her strength, her intuition, and her ability to connect with people in ways that complemented his own more formal approach. During a visit to a children's hospital in Melbourne, William found himself struggling to maintain his usual composure. A young boy, perhaps the same age as Louis, had asked him about his own children with such genuine curiosity that William had to excuse himself for a moment to regain his composure. The boy's mother had looked at him with understanding, perhaps recognizing the pain of separation that transcended royal protocol. "It's hard to be away from them, isn't it?" she had said quietly, and William had nodded, unable to trust his voice. In that moment, he wasn't the future king of England. He was simply a father missing his children, a husband missing his wife, a man questioning whether the demands of his position were worth the price his family was paying. The phone calls home had become increasingly difficult. Catherine's voice carried a new quality that William couldn't quite interpret. She sounded stronger, more confident, but also more distant somehow. She told him about her successful engagements, about the children's activities, about the smooth functioning of their household in his absence. Each piece of good news should have been reassuring, but instead it raised uncomfortable questions about his own necessity in their daily lives. "Charlotte lost her first tooth today," Catherine told him during one of their evening conversations. "She was so excited, but when she realized you weren't here to see it, she started crying. I managed to calm her down, but it broke my heart." William felt a familiar stab of guilt and frustration. These were the moments that mattered, the small milestones that formed the foundation of family life. Missing them felt like a betrayal of the promises he had made to Catherine when they married, the commitment to put family first whenever possible. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm so sorry I'm not there for these things." "No," Catherine replied, and William heard something in her voice that he couldn't identify. Forgiveness, perhaps, but also something else. A kind of acceptance that worried him more than anger would have. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes. But William found himself distracted by the undercurrents he was sensing. Catherine was managing beautifully without him, perhaps too beautifully. The children were adapting to his absence with the resilience of youth, but also with a flexibility that suggested his presence might be less essential than he had believed. His private secretary knocked on the door, reminding him of the evening's state dinner. William ended the call with the usual expressions of love and longing. But he felt a growing distance that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with the fundamental questions the separation was raising about their relationship. At the state dinner, William performed his duties with the polished ease that came from years of training and practice. He made appropriate conversation with dignitaries, delivered his speech with the right balance of formality and warmth, and represented his country with the dignity expected of his position. But throughout the evening he found himself thinking, about Catherine's growing independence and what it might mean for their future together. The Australian Prime Minister's wife approached him during the reception, her manner warm but perceptive. "Your Highness, I hope you don't mind my saying, but you seem somewhat distracted this evening. I imagine it must be difficult being away from your family for so long." William smiled, the expression automatic but genuine. "Yes, it is challenging. My wife and children are very much on my mind. I've been following the coverage of the Princess of Wales's recent engagements," the woman continued. "She's been quite remarkable, hasn't she? Such strength and grace under what must be difficult circumstances." The comment was meant as a compliment, but it struck William in an unexpected way. Catherine's strength was being noticed, praised, perhaps even preferred to their usual partnership. The thought was both proud and troubling, a reminder that royal life was always being observed, evaluated, and compared. Later that night, alone in his hotel room, William found himself scrolling through online coverage of Catherine's recent appearances. The photographs showed her in a new light, more confident and commanding than he had seen her in months. The accompanying articles praised her solo performances, her ability to handle complex engagements without support, her emergence as a royal figure in her own right. One particular article caught his attention. The Princess of Wales, finding her voice in solo spotlight. The piece analyzed her recent speeches and public appearances, noting a new authenticity and emotional depth that had resonated with the public. The author suggested that Catherine's solo week had revealed aspects of her personality that had been overshadowed by her role as William's supportive partner. William closed his laptop, feeling uncomfortable with the implications of what he had read. He had always been proud of Catherine's abilities, had always encouraged her to take on more responsibility and find her own path within the constraints of royal life. But seeing her succeed so completely in his absence raised questions about their dynamic that he wasn't ready to confront. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Children asleep. Thinking of you. Hope the dinner went well." The message was warm and loving, but William found himself analyzing it for signs of the distance he was feeling. Was she being polite? Was she genuinely missing him? Or was she simply maintaining the routine of their communication? He typed several responses, deleting each one before settling on a simple, "Miss you terribly. Call tomorrow?" But as he sent the message, William wondered if the woman who would answer his call tomorrow would be the same person who had said goodbye to him in their driveway 2 weeks ago. The extension of his tour, which had seemed like a diplomatic necessity, now felt like a test that he wasn't sure he wanted to pass. For more days to prove that he could handle his royal duties independently, but also for more days for Catherine to prove that she could handle everything else. The balance they had built over years of marriage was shifting. William wasn't sure what it would look like when he finally returned home. Outside his hotel window, Sydney Harbor sparkled in the moonlight, beautiful and foreign and impossibly far from the life he had built with Catherine and their children. Tomorrow would bring more engagements, more responsibilities, more opportunities to serve his country and Commonwealth. But tonight, William felt more alone than he had since the early days of their courtship, when the future of their relationship had been uncertain and the path forward had been unclear. The phone call came at 3 a.m. London time, jolting Catherine from the deepest sleep she had managed in weeks. William's name appeared on her screen, and she answered immediately, her heart racing with the sudden fear that accompanies unexpected, middle-of-the-night communications. "Catherine, I'm sorry to wake you." William's voice was strained, carrying an emotional weight that cut through the digital distance between them. "I needed to hear your voice. I needed to tell you something." Catherine sat up in bed, instantly alert despite the early hour. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm not okay," William said, and the raw honesty in his voice stopped Catherine's breath. "I'm sitting in a hotel room in Auckland, and I feel like I'm losing you. Like every day I'm away, you're becoming someone who doesn't need me anymore." Words hung in the air between them, heavy with vulnerability and fear. Catherine felt her heart break for the pain in his voice. Also felt a surge of something else in Gar, perhaps her frustration at the impossible position they had been placed in. "William, that's not true," she said, but even as she spoke, she knew the situation was more complicated than simple reassurance could address. "I do need you. We all need you. But I also need to be able to function when you're not here. I need to be strong enough to handle our life, our children, our responsibilities." "I know," William replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you do, and I'm proud of you for that. But I'm scared, Catherine. I'm scared that you're discovering you're better off without me." Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past 3 weeks settling around her like a heavy blanket. The conversation they were having was the one they had both been avoiding, the one that addressed the fundamental questions their separation had raised about their relationship, their individual identities, and their future together. "I'm not better off without you," she said carefully, "but I am different without you. This time apart has shown me parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. I've been so focused on being your wife, on supporting your role, on fitting into the life we built together, that I lost sight of who I am independently." William was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could hear the distant sounds of traffic in Auckland, the foreign symphony of a city waking up on the other side of the world. "What does that mean for us?" he asked finally. "I don't know, Catherine," admitted, and the honesty felt both terrifying and liberating. "I think it means we need to figure out how to be married to each other while also being complete individuals. I think it means we need to find a way to share our life without losing ourselves in the process." They talked for over an hour, navigating the complex emotional landscape that their separation had revealed. William shared his fears about returning home to find a family that had learned to function without him. Catherine explained her growing understanding of her own capabilities and her need to maintain some of the independence she had discovered. They both acknowledged that their relationship had reached a turning point that would require careful navigation and honest communication. "I miss you," William said as their conversation began to wind down. "I miss you so much it feels like a physical ache. But I also understand what you're saying about needing to find yourself again." "I miss you too," Catherine replied. "I also need you to know that the woman you're missing isn't the same woman who said goodbye to you 3 weeks ago. When you come home, you'll be coming home to someone who has changed." After they hung up, Catherine lay awake in the pre-dawn darkness, thinking about the conversation and its implications. She had been honest with William in a way that felt both necessary and risky. Their marriage had always been built on mutual support and shared purpose. But this separation had revealed the need for individual growth and personal identity within their partnership. The next morning, Catherine approached her royal duties with renewed purpose. She had a full day of engagements, including a visit to a women's shelter and a meeting with education officials about childhood development programs. But instead of simply performing her duties, she found herself bringing a new level of personal investment to each interaction. At the women's shelter, she spoke with residents about their experiences rebuilding their lives after difficult circumstances. Their stories of resilience and self-discovery resonated with her own recent journey, and she found herself sharing more personal insights than she had in previous engagements. "Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves again," she told a group of women who were working to establish their independence. "Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit that we need to change, that we need to grow, that we need to become who we're meant to be." The women responded with nods of understanding, recognizing something authentic in her words that transcended her royal title. Catherine realized that her personal struggles had given her a deeper connection to the people she served, a more genuine understanding of the challenges they faced. That afternoon, she received a call from William's private secretary with an update on the tour's progress. Final engagements were going well, and William was scheduled to return to London in 4 days. But the secretary also mentioned that there had been inquiries from senior palace officials about the possibility of Catherine taking on additional solo responsibilities in the future. "The response to your recent engagements has been overwhelmingly positive," the secretary explained. "There's interest in exploring how you might expand your independent role within the royal family's work." Catherine felt a surge of excitement at the prospect, but also a recognition of how such changes might affect her relationship with William. They would need to have serious conversations about how to balance their individual growth with their shared responsibilities as a married couple and as future monarchs. That evening, As she tucked the children into bed, George asked a question that surprised her with its maturity. "Mummy, are you and Daddy going to be different when he comes home?" Catherine considered the question carefully before responding. "We might be, sweetheart. But sometimes when people spend time apart, they learn new things about themselves. Important thing is that we still love each other, and we still love you and Charlotte and Louis more than anything in the world." "But different can be good, right?" George persisted. "Like when I learned to ride my bike without training wheels. I was different, but it was better." Catherine smiled, struck by the wisdom in her son's simple analogy. "Yes, darling, different can definitely be good, especially when it means becoming stronger and more capable." As she kissed him goodnight, Catherine realized that George had articulated something important about their situation. Change didn't have to mean loss. Growth didn't have to mean growing apart. The challenge would be learning to integrate their individual development into their shared life, to become better partners by becoming better individuals. Later that night, Catherine sat in the garden with a cup of tea, looking up at the stars and thinking about William somewhere on the other side of the world, probably preparing for his final engagements before the long journey home. In 4 days, they would be reunited, but they would also be beginning a new chapter in their relationship, one that would require them to redefine what it meant to be married, to be partners, and to be themselves within the context of their extraordinary life. The morning of William's return dawned gray and drizzly, matching Catherine's complicated emotions about the reunion she had been both anticipating and dreading. She had woken before dawn, unable to sleep through the anxiety and excitement that had been building for days. 24 days apart had felt like both an eternity and a moment. Long enough to change everything, and short enough to make those changes feel fragile and new. The children were unusually quiet at breakfast, sensing the significance of the day without fully understanding its implications. Charlotte had changed her outfit 3 times, wanting to look perfect for Daddy's return. George had asked twice about the flight schedule, his 11-year-old mind trying to process the logistics of international travel and emotional reunion. Louis had been carrying around a drawing he had made for William, a colorful depiction of their family standing together under a rainbow. "When will Daddy be home?" Charlotte asked for the 4th time, her small hands fidgeting with her napkin. The question that had sustained them through nearly a month of separation now carried additional weight, as if she somehow understood that the Daddy who returned might be different from the one who had left. "His plane lands at 2 o'clock, Catherine replied, checking her watch automatically. "He should be home by 4, maybe earlier if the traffic isn't too bad." The mundane details of travel and timing felt surreal against the backdrop of the emotional journey they had all been on. Catherine had spent the previous evening preparing for William's return with the same careful attention she brought to important royal engagements. She had chosen her outfit deliberately, settling on a blue dress that William had always complimented, but pairing it with a new necklace she had bought for herself during his absence. The combination felt symbolic somehow, a blend of their shared history and her individual growth. The house had been cleaned and organized with military precision, though Catherine knew William wouldn't notice such details. She had prepared his favorite meal for dinner, arranged fresh flowers in their bedroom, and even bought a bottle of the wine they had shared on their wedding night. But beneath these gestures of welcome, she felt a nervous energy that reminded her of their early dating days, when each reunion after time apart had carried the potential for joy or disappointment. At noon, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from William, "Boarding the plane now. Can't wait to see you and the children. I love you." The message was warm and loving. Catherine found herself analyzing it for clues about his emotional state, his expectations for their reunion, his readiness to navigate the changes that had occurred during their separation. She responded with a heart emoji and a simple, "safe travels," but immediately regretted the brevity of her reply. There was so much she wanted to say, so many things they needed to discuss, but text messages felt inadequate for the complexity of their situation. Afternoon passed slowly, marked by the children's growing excitement and Catherine's increasing nervousness. She found herself checking her appearance in mirrors, adjusting her hair, applying lip gloss with hands that trembled slightly. The woman looking back at her was familiar but different, carrying herself with a confidence that hadn't been there. A month ago, at 3:30, Catherine received a call from William's security detail, confirming that his plane had landed safely, and that they were en route to Adelaide Cottage. The news sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system, and she gathered the children in the living room, trying to prepare them for a reunion that felt monumental in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. "Remember, Daddy might be tired from his long trip," she told them, though she was really preparing herself for the possibility that he might seem different, distant, or overwhelmed by the prospect of reintegrating into their family life. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway sent the children racing to the front door, their excitement finally overcoming their earlier restraint. Catherine followed more slowly, her heart pounding as she heard William's familiar voice greeting the security team and thanking them for their service. The front door opened, and William stepped inside, looking tired but genuinely happy to be home. He was immediately engulfed by his children, who threw themselves at him with the unreserved enthusiasm that only children can manage. Catherine watched from a few feet away, struck by how natural and right the scene looked, but also aware of the subtle changes in William's appearance and manner. He looked older somehow, more serious, but also more relaxed than when he had left. The formal tension that had characterized his demeanor during those final weeks before his departure had been replaced by something softer, more contemplative. When his eyes found hers over the children's heads, Catherine saw recognition there, an acknowledgement of the journey they had both been on. "Hello," he said simply, and in that single word, Catherine heard everything they needed to discuss, all the changes they needed to navigate, all the love that had sustained them through their separation. "Hello," she replied, stepping forward to embrace him. The hug was careful at first, tentative, but then William pulled her closer, and Catherine felt some of the tension she had been carrying for weeks begin to dissolve. "I missed you," he whispered against her hair, and Catherine felt tears she hadn't expected beginning to form. "I missed you too," she replied, meaning it completely, but also knowing that the woman he was holding was not exactly the same woman he had left behind. They spent the evening as a family, sharing dinner and listening to William's stories about his travels. The children dominated the conversation, eager to tell their father about everything he had missed. But Catherine found herself studying William's face, looking for signs of how he was processing their reunion and the changes he was undoubtedly noticing in their household dynamics. After the children were in bed, Catherine and William finally had the opportunity for the private conversation they had both been anticipating. They sat in their living room, the space feeling both familiar and strange with William's presence restored to it. "How are you?" Liam asked, and Catherine heard the deeper question beneath the surface. How had she changed? How had their separation affected her? What did she need from him now? "I'm good," she said, then corrected herself. "Actually, I'm different. I'm stronger, I think, more independent. But I'm also ready to figure out how to be married to you again." William nodded, his expression serious but not troubled. "I'm different too. This time away gave me perspective on what really matters, on what I want our life to look like. I don't want to go back to the way things were before I left." They talked until nearly midnight, sharing their experiences, their fears, their hopes for their future together. They discussed the possibility of Catherine taking on more independent royal duties, the need to maintain their individual identities within their marriage, and the importance of creating a partnership that allowed both of them to grow. "I love you," William said as they prepared for bed, "but I also love who you've become while I was away. I don't want you to give up that strength, that independence, just because I'm home." "I love you too," Catherine replied, "and I love that you can see the changes in me without feeling threatened by them. I think we can be better together now than we were before." As they lay in bed together for the first time in nearly a month, Catherine felt a sense of completion that went beyond simple physical reunion. They had survived their separation, learned from it, and emerged as individuals who were ready to choose each other again. With full knowledge of what that choice meant, the quiet moment that had begun with their emotional goodbye had transformed into something deeper, a recognition that love could grow stronger through challenge, that independence could enhance rather than threaten partnership, and that sometimes the most powerful thing couples could do was learn to miss each other enough to never take their connection for granted again. Outside their window, the same October wind that had marked William's departure now seemed to whisper of new beginnings, of seasons changing, of love that had been tested and had emerged not just intact but more vibrant than before. Their emotional goodbye had become an emotional hello. The story of their separation had become the foundation for a stronger, more conscious partnership that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead.